There is a strange and often painful truth in human relationships. Sometimes your kindness will not be met with gratitude, but with hostility. You may offer warmth and receive only coldness in return. You may extend your hand and find it slapped away. This paradox is not a flaw in kindness itself, but a reflection of the shadows within others, and sometimes within ourselves. To understand why people cannot stand you, even when you are good to them, you must look beneath the surface of human behavior, into the quiet realms of fear, projection, and unspoken wounds. Your kindness, when it is real and uncalculated, becomes more than just a pleasant gesture. It becomes a mirror, one that reflects the truth of a person back to themselves without distortion, without mercy, without the softening filters they have grown accustomed to using when they look inward. It is not that you intend to expose them, nor that you carry judgment in your heart, but the very act of being consistently generous, compassionate, and free from hidden agendas forces them to see their own shortcomings in a way they cannot easily ignore, and for many, this is profoundly uncomfortable. In your presence, they become aware of the ways they have failed to extend that same warmth to others, the moments where selfishness overtook generosity, the times they could have lifted someone up, but chose instead to look away. Your kindness becomes a light that shines into corners of their inner world they would prefer to keep dark, and once illuminated, those corners begin to stir with the restless movement of guilt and shame, feelings they would rather bury than confront. They may not consciously articulate it, but somewhere deep within, they sense that being around you demands a kind of self-honesty they are not ready for, and instead of meeting that challenge, they reject the source of it, you. Because it is far easier to label you as insincere, to dismiss you as manipulative, or to convince themselves you have some hidden motive, than it is to acknowledge that perhaps the discomfort they feel is not born from your flaws, but from their own unwillingness to face the truth you unknowingly reveal. And so they push you away, not because your kindness is unwelcome in the abstract, but because it calls them to rise to a standard they have not yet chosen to meet, and in doing so, it unsettles the fragile balance they have built within themselves, a balance held together not by peace, but by avoidance, not by love, but by the careful management of what they will and will not allow themselves to see. This is why even the most sincere warmth can be met with coldness, why generosity can be met with suspicion, and why, no matter how much good you offer, there will always be those who cannot stand the way you make them feel, not because you have harmed them, but because you have reminded them of what they have chosen to hide from themselves. And this is the quiet, invisible burden of being someone whose goodness is not a performance, but an extension of who you are. You will find that it shines in places you never intended it to, and the light it casts will not always be welcomed, for some hearts are not yet ready to be seen. Some people live with an unshakable sense of inadequacy, a quiet but constant fear that they are not enough, that they will always fall short in the eyes of others. And when you extend kindness toward them, instead of feeling grateful, they may feel exposed in a way that unsettles them at the deepest level, because your gesture, however well-intentioned, is a subtle confirmation that they were in need to begin with, and this touches a nerve they have worked hard to protect. You may believe you are offering something beautiful, a moment of connection, a relief from their burdens, but in their mind, it is tangled with a reminder of their vulnerability, and vulnerability for them is not a state of trust, but a risk they are unwilling to take. When you help, they may not see it as compassion, but as evidence of their own inability to stand alone, and in a world where they have built their identity on self-reliance or on the illusion of independence, such reminders are rarely welcomed. Pride rises up to defend them, whispering that your kindness is condescending, that you are only helping to make yourself feel superior, that you are silently keeping score, even when none of that is true, and the more generous you are, the more they feel as though the balance between you is tilting, not in their favor, but against their sense of dignity. This misinterpretation does not always happen consciously. Often it is born from years of learned defense, from experiences where help came with strings attached, or where the one offering kindness used it as a weapon later. Your actions may have no such hidden motives, but the shadows of their past can cast over your present interactions, coloring your every gesture in suspicion. And so, when you extend a hand, they pull theirs back, not because they dislike you personally, but because accepting your kindness would force them to confront the very feeling they spend their lives avoiding, the feeling of being dependent on someone else. To them, being helped means losing control, losing their place in the unspoken hierarchy they believe governs all human relationships, and in their mind, that loss cannot be tolerated. They may even project onto you a sense of arrogance that does not exist, imagining you see yourself as above them simply because you had something to give while they were in a position to receive. The truth is, kindness, when genuine, comes from a place beyond superiority and inferiority. It is a language of shared humanity, but for those who live within the rigid boundaries of pride and insecurity, this language feels foreign, even threatening. And so they may mock your kindness, question your motives, or subtly distance themselves from you, all as a means of preserving their own self-image, for it is easier to resent the giver than to admit the pain of needing to receive. This is the paradox you will face when you are kind in a world where kindness is often misunderstood. Your intention may be pure, but purity does not always translate as safety in the hearts of those who have learned to guard themselves against the possibility of being seen as less. And until they are ready to see kindness not as a threat to their dignity, but as an affirmation of their worth, they will meet your generosity not with open arms, but with closed doors. People often feel safest when they believe they understand the rules of the world around them, when they can predict the behavior of those they interact with, when they can anticipate outcomes and maintain some form of control over their environment, and this sense of control extends to their relationships as well, where they subconsciously assign roles, test boundaries, and establish unspoken agreements about how much they can influence or manipulate others to protect their own sense of stability. When someone encounters you and realizes that your kindness does not fit into those rules, that it does not come with the usual conditions or predictable responses they have grown used to, it unsettles them on a level they may not be able to articulate. They cannot place you in the same category as those who give only when they expect something back, who use politeness to mask manipulation, who follow social scripts for the sake of appearance, because your generosity moves outside of those predictable patterns, and unpredictability makes people feel vulnerable. They cannot control what they do not understand, and what they cannot control they begin to distrust. It is not that they believe you mean harm, but rather that they are uncomfortable with the idea that you are not playing the same game they are, because games are where they feel safe. They know the moves, the strategies, the costs and rewards, but when you refuse to play, you remove the rules entirely, and without rules they lose their sense of power. They may try to impose new ones, attempting to test your boundaries, pushing to see if there is a hidden limit to your patience or a secret price for your kindness, because if they can find that limit, they will feel reassured that you are just like everyone else and therefore within their understanding. When you remain steady, when your actions continue to flow without the hidden ledger they expect, it forces them into a space of uncertainty, and uncertainty can feel like danger to someone who relies on control to navigate the world. They may begin to view you not as a friend or ally, but as an unknown element in their carefully managed environment, something they cannot predict and therefore cannot trust, and trust for them is not built on goodness but on familiarity. The irony is that your unwillingness to play their games should be the very thing that proves your sincerity, yet for them it becomes the reason they suspect you most. They would rather deal with someone openly serving than with someone whose motives they cannot map, because self-interest is easy to read, easy to anticipate, easy to manipulate, but sincerity requires them to step into a realm where they cannot dictate the terms. And so they may react with resistance, with passive aggression, or even with outright hostility, not because you have wronged them, but because you have denied them the comfort of control. In their world, relationships are about leverage, about mutual concessions, about trading influence in a way that keeps everyone in their assigned place. And when you refuse to conform to that structure, when your kindness refuses to be currency, they feel stripped of the very tools they use to protect themselves. This is why some people cannot stand you even when you are kind, because your kindness does not obey their rules, and without rules they feel powerless, and people who feel powerless often lash out at the source of that feeling, not realizing that what they are rejecting is not you, but the discomfort of facing a connection that cannot be controlled. There are people who have grown so accustomed to living in a state of negativity that it has become their version of normal, a constant undercurrent of dissatisfaction, resentment, and bitterness that shapes the way they view the world and the people in it. And when they encounter someone whose presence radiates kindness, patience, and a calm steadiness that refuses to feed into that negativity, it creates a disturbance in the environment they have built for themselves. Your kindness, instead of being a comfort, becomes an interruption, a subtle but undeniable challenge to the emotional reality they inhabit. It does not give them the fuel they are used to, the arguments, the drama, the shared complaints that validate their world. And in its absence, they feel not peace, but a kind of disorientation. They may not consciously realize it, but part of them depends on others to participate in their cycles of frustration and blame, because these cycles give them a sense of belonging and shared identity. And when you refuse to participate, when you respond to hostility with calmness, to complaints with understanding, to bitterness with patience, you disrupt the unspoken agreement that everyone around them will reinforce their negativity. This disruption can be deeply uncomfortable because it forces them to confront the possibility that their way of seeing the world is not the only way, and for some, that is more threatening than comforting. Your presence becomes like a mirror showing them what life could be without the constant weight of resentment, and rather than stepping toward that possibility, they may push it away, because letting go of negativity means also letting go of the identity and habits that have kept them anchored for so long. It is easier for them to see your kindness as naive, to dismiss it as weakness, or to suspect it as a cover for hidden motives than to accept that it might be real and therefore requires them to question their own stance toward life. They might even feel a subtle resentment toward the ease with which you carry yourself, the way you seem untouched by the heaviness that defines their days, because it reminds them of the inner freedom they either believe they cannot have or are unwilling to work toward. And so, instead of being drawn to your light, they may try to dim it, whether through cynicism, sarcasm, or outright hostility, because if they can make you react in kind, if they can draw you into their emotional atmosphere, it will reaffirm their belief that kindness is a facade and that no one is truly different. This is why some people cannot stand you even when you are good to them, because your goodness does not nourish the negativity they have chosen to sustain, and without that nourishment, they are left face to face with the emptiness beneath their anger, an emptiness they are not yet ready to confront. To protect themselves from that confrontation, they will reject the very thing that could free them from it, not realizing that their rejection says far more about their own inner state than it ever could about yours. There are those who have lived through betrayals so sharp and so unexpected that they have come to associate kindness not with safety but with danger, because in their memory, the people who hurt them most were often the ones who first approached with warmth, charm, and apparent care. And when you show them genuine kindness, it does not land as a gift, but as a warning signal, stirring old memories that whisper of pain disguised as love. To you, your actions may be entirely free of hidden intent, but to them, every gesture carries the weight of a past wound, and their mind, trained by experience to protect them at all costs, begins to search for the moment when the betrayal will come. They do not reject your kindness because it feels unpleasant in itself, but because it triggers the instinct to guard themselves from a repeat of the hurt they once endured, and that instinct can be so strong that it overrides the possibility of trust altogether. In their eyes, it is safer to reject you preemptively than to open the door and risk history repeating itself, because vulnerability for them has been tied so tightly to loss that they cannot separate the two. Every smile, every small act of generosity, every patient word may be interpreted not as evidence of your goodness but as the setting of a trap, one they have learned to detect early and avoid at all costs, and so they distance themselves, sometimes subtly, sometimes abruptly, leaving you wondering how your kindness could possibly be the cause of such resistance. What you may not see is that their rejection is a shield, and that shield has been forged over years of experiences where lowering it came with consequences too heavy to bear again. The tragedy in this is that the very thing they long for, genuine connection, understanding, safety, is the thing they are forced to push away, because the pain of being deceived once has taught them to treat even the possibility of sincerity with suspicion. In their world, the appearance of kindness is not evidence of trustworthiness, but an opening move in a game they refuse to play again, and so they meet it with guarded eyes and a readiness to retreat at the first sign of what they perceive as danger. You may think that time, patience, and consistency will eventually prove your intentions, and in some cases it will, but for many, the past is not something that can be erased by present actions alone. The associations are too deeply carved into their sense of reality, and they live in a constant state of scanning for threats, even in places where no threat exists. This is why some people cannot stand you even when you are kind. It is not that they despise your kindness in itself, but that they have been conditioned to see it as the first step toward inevitable hurt. They cannot yet tell the difference between the hands that intend to heal and the hands that once wounded them, and so they treat all hands with the same wary distance. Until they choose to confront and heal the old injuries that keep them locked in this pattern, they will continue to meet warmth with coldness, sincerity with doubt, and love with withdrawal, not because you have done anything to deserve it, but because the shadows of their past are still standing between you and the truth of who you are. When others cannot stand you despite your kindness, remember, their reaction is rarely about you. It is about the truths you awaken in them, the shadows you stir, the insecurities you expose, often without intention. Do not let the rejection of your light convince you to dim it, for kindness is not a transaction to be measured in returns, but a way of being that holds its own reward. Continue to be kind, not for their approval, but because it is the truest reflection of who you are. And know this: those who are ready for your light will never turn away from it.